Hello there. Hi. This is Paul Glumaz once again, and this is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. And today is the 26th of September. We are 35 days away from the election, which is not an election anymore. It is not an election. There will not be a real election. It is something very different. And today I want to go through the deeper aspects of the battle we are going into, both going into November 3rd and then coming out of November 3rd, which it is doubtful that November 3rd will be conclusive. And even if Donald Trump is established in a second term, there's still a huge battle ahead, because as Donald Trump begins to drain the swamp isn't going to just allow itself to be drained. It's going to fight back. So there's going to be a very intense period ahead. Now, to give you a flavor of what we're talking about, the lady or woman, or whatever you want to call her, Kamala Harris, is saying, her comment about the rioting and the burning down of things and Antifa and all of that was very strident. She said they are not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And she put her imprimatur onto the whole insurrection in these democratically controlled cities, where they refuse to call out the National Guard to clean it up. Now, in the middle of all this, we have this so-called mail-in balloting. And the issue is that there's millions of ballots going out. People are saying that they're getting 6 ballots for people that have been dead 10 years, or 20 ballots, or 10 at various different addresses. The whole thing is chaotic. The whole thing is already chaotic, where the ballots are being sent out. And these millions of ballots are going out. There's no accountability. There's no check to see if this is the person that's voting for it, or if the person is legitimate, or if there even such a person exists, or whether they're a citizen, or whatever. There is no checks and balances, and that's deliberate. That's a deliberate policy that's been going on for a number of years now in these democratically controlled areas, because they have found that that this is how they can keep power. As their policies have tremendously negative impacts, they can keep power in this way. So it's already looking like there's going to be massive court challenges in many of the battleground states. And you're going to have the Democrats are now organizing, Biden campaign are organizing an army of lawyers and lawyers, and they're deploying the district attorneys that were paid for, their elections were paid for by George Soros. George Soros, over a decade or two, has been gradually putting in these district attorneys that are elected in various different venues, in various different jurisdictions, to end the policing of the drug trade as part of the whole legalization of drugs, but depolicing of criminal activity. And this is in major cities where this is going on. This has happened. Now, Trump has reflected upon this in the following way. I think this will end up in the Supreme Court, Trump said. And I think it is very important that we have 9 judges. And so we are now about to get another judge in there, nominated by Trump. So this is not an election. And you can see this in the fact that this guy, Joe Biden, can't even handle an interview with a reporter without a teleprompter, and then he goofs on the teleprompter. And how are you going to expect him to debate President Trump? Well, they don't really care how he does in the debate. And they don't care how often Kamala Harris appears reading a teleprompter stoned out of her mind. I saw one of her videos where she looked like she was high on something. She really did. And she had that kind of cloudy, smoky, happy kind of, like she's high, And I'm saying it doesn't really matter to them, because it's not going to be an election where people vote. It's going to be a disruption. People are going to vote, and it's a disruption. It's a disruption of the election. They're not intending to win an election. They're intending to disrupt the election and have an all-out battle in the courts, and then have an all-out battle later in the Congress. And that's really what's going on. And so it's not about who's going to get the vote at this point. We pretty much know that Donald Trump will probably get a landslide of the votes, despite the polls. And, these polls that are being done, it's very hard because people don't want to identify that they are going to vote for Trump because of the fear factor. They might get fired. They might lose their job. They might get in trouble. It's better not to say that you're going to vote for Trump. So the people who would vote for Trump do not want to participate in any polling interview. And that's part of the whole situation of the polls. So this is a very, very this is what's going to happen. Okay. Now I want to get into the actual stakes. What are the actual stakes that are involved here? The consequences of this election period will determine world history for generations to come. Either a dark age, perhaps, or a renaissance. It's all there. Without the positive role of the United States in ending the endless wars and negotiating with Russia and China to end the British Empire, a dark age will descend upon us. 17, give you a sense of the power that we're up against. 17 financial institutions control 41 trillion in assets. That's what you're dealing with. That's the British Empire. And the only way this can be dealt with is if a concert of nations establish a new set of rules in terms of the world financial system. So now I want to go into the deeper questions. The long-term insurgency against the nation state and the idea of the good or the Commonwealth, which emerged in the 1400s, has been the issue. Because what is the only thing that can prevent this global financial structure, this globalization, from wiping out most of the human race? It's the power of the nation state. And the development of the modern nation state goes back to the 1400s with France and England, Louis XI of France and Henry VII of England. They are the first modern nations because they are established based on the idea of the Commonwealth or the general welfare. And the most important subversive institution of the modern period is something that emerged in the 1930s called the Frankfurt School. And what the Frankfurt School had a sense of was only in countries which were not that developed, that is not industrialized, and they had a large population that was under some kind of feudalism or peasantry or what have you. Those are the countries that actually where communist revolutions took place, like Russia, or socialist revolutions like Mexico, and then later China. That's a more complicated situation. Vietnam, countries in Africa. This is where you either had attempted socialist revolutions or communist revolutions, but never did you have any such thing in the more industrialized countries. Yet that was contrary to Marxist theory, which says that the capitalist class would create the proletariat And at some point, the proletariat would have to overthrow the capitalist class and take control of the means of production and so on and so forth. Now, one of the founders of the Frankfurt School, his name is Horkheimer, began something called critical theory to deal with this problem, that the people of industrialized nations had certain values, certain Christian values, certain moral values, and would not revolt because they saw themselves in solidarity with the nation as a whole, not based on class struggle. In other words, they weren't oriented towards class struggle because they saw the totality of the nation as a one, and they were part of that nation. And so you have this critical theory emerging on how to deal with the fact that the working class in these more advanced nations and the middle class were not interested in revolting. Okay, we're not interested in a communist revolution. Oh, they might join a political party for increasing the wages or increasing public services and things like that, but they weren't there to go for a revolution. So how do you create a revolution when you don't have when it's not just an oppressive feudal society? And the idea was, how do you go about destroying the concept of truth, rationality, the good, and that quality of empowerment that comes from a sense of a general welfare that unites all the society? How do you go after that? How do you destroy that? And so they took this idea of a Marxist revolution, which has never worked in the way Marx talked about, and tried to create circumstances for undermining the culture such that people would become crazy enough to revolt. And that's been the long-term orientation of the Frankfurt School. So the Frankfurt School program in the U.S., it fully emerges out of the politics in the late 60s and 70s as the New Left, and a parallel base in Aleister Crowley's Satanist emerges as the rock, drug, sex counterculture. So you have the rock, drug, sex counterculture and the New Left emerging. And the New Left is not based on a working class revolution, but it's based upon this idea during the Vietnam War of overthrowing the existing order, but not from the standpoint of an economic policy, but from increasingly a standpoint of identity politics. Now, at the same time, earlier you have Theodor Adorno of the Frankfurt School leading a massive war on classical culture and the promotion of atonal music. And you had Herbert Marcuse, who led the transformation of the New Left towards an anti-working class orientation. Okay, and they labeled the inner qualities of the soul, which is based on a concreted power of judgment that everyone has, an authoritarian tendency. In other words, if you were not willing to have consensus and you had an internal, personal internal idea that was contrary to consensus, you were an authoritarian personality. And long before you got to cancel culture, if you asserted something was true, you would be attacked. You would have to say, well, I don't know if it's, if you asserted truth, if you asserted rationality. And so most of the educated class for several generations has become susceptible to all of this. And some of the spin-offs of this was feminism, race theory, LBGT. What Horkheimer said cultural theory was for was to liberate individuals from oppression. What he meant by oppression is the tyranny of rationality, the tyranny of the good, the tyranny of the sense of one's personal responsibility to the nation, the tyranny of one's personal responsibility to the truth. Those are considered tyrannical impositions on the individual. You know, the nuclear family, the fact that you have a certain moral structure there. The fact that you believe in all of that is a form of oppression, right? It's a lie. It's a form of oppression. You can do whatever you want. You don't have any freedom, okay? You don't have the freedom, you know, to do whatever you want with your children, that kind of thing. So what's happened is that Trump, back on September 17th, at the repository of documents on Constitution Day, began a declaration of war against this cultural infection that has been going on since the 60s. And this is very important, because how do you counter the underlying deployment in the streets of crazy people and anarchists as well as mercenaries? How do you neutralize the potential of that spreading to other areas of the population that are suffering from the economic conditions or are suffering from, a rough situation with the police or whatever, where there's a lot of sentiment, anti-establishment sentiment, anti-police sentiment, anti-whatever? How do you stop that from spreading? And what Trump is doing is instead of just taking a hard line, law and order, or let's patriots stand up to the enemy, the globalists. No, what he's doing is something more profound. He issued an executive order a few days ago, and saying we will no longer have any stereotyping of people in the government, in the military, or in contractors. You cannot stereotype people by race or by sex. You cannot use that in any way in the employment or in determining whether a person advances or not, or whatever. It has to be based on merits and merit only. And this executive order is an example of this. So now the key to defeating the left insurgency in the streets is to activate culturally the underlying culture such that one operates those who would, such that one separates those who would otherwise tend to join the insurgency into reaffirming the deeper self of who they are, which is not the insurgency, the deeper self of what it is to be an American. And this is where Trump comes in with Lincoln. Are you prepared to secure the powers of the presidency? Okay, so to give you an example of this, the African American community has been severely targeted by all of these things. So what has Trump done? He has gone into the African American community, and he has put forward King's version, Dr. Martin Luther King's version of the promissory note in the founding documents of the United States. And he just gave a presentation in Georgia where he said that he's preparing to put $500 billion in to develop these communities, to develop the industries, to develop the jobs, to the education, and he had 8 African American congressional candidates there with him. So he's going into these layers and reaffirming the sense of what King's vision, Dr. King's vision is. That's how you do cultural warfare. That's how you separate those who might join out of frustration or out of just sheer having enough. And this is very important. Rather than have a direct military confrontation, he's organizing to separate the insurgency from the potential that might be triggered into that insurgency. He's doing the same with other ethnic communities, Hispanic communities. So let's re-examine this critical race theory, this cancel culture, how it works. It challenges all ideas of universality. That's what critical theory does. It challenges the idea that there's a universal human mind, that there's a universe. And And thus, you are a product of your circumstances. You are not a product. You don't have a universality. You are merely an individual, and you are trapped or a prisoner of your circumstances, and that's who you are, and you can't change that. And therefore, that defines who you are. And that's what they're trying to do to the population. They're trying to define you by this, and then that divides you from the whole. That divides you from the nation. That divides you from the general welfare. And that's how they plan to run and control people, is by defining them in this way. Now, critical theory comes out of a Marxist Freudian orientation. Marx in terms of a revolution, but Freudian in terms of the rejection of universals and looking at human beings as basically a biological force. And before Schiller, in classical culture, what was seen as shaping the development of the personality are certain ideals, or the ideal person. And what Freud did was change that to saying that what shapes the personality is the encounter of the sex drive, of the hunger drive, of all of the drives with the society, with the repression by the society. And then that's what creates the personality, not the attempt to fulfill the ideals in the culture, the ideals in the society, which is how people actually do develop. That's how children develop. They have a sense of becoming. They have a sense of a direction based upon the culture that they're in and based upon their interaction with the society and their parents. For feminists, it's the same. The basis of oppression, imperialism, colonialism, is embedded in the oppression of women by men. The Freudian part is that overthrowing of the classical conception of the nature of man is essential, and the reduction of human beings to these biological urges. Okay, and that's what the Frankfurt School is also about. So that's why they say critical theory and the Frankfurt approach comes out of Marx and Freud, and that's, the way they look at it. So what happened in the 60s and the 70s, along with everything, is the corruption that has been going on for 3 generations. This corruption, should that corruption finally succeed in taking full power in the United States, you have a horrible world. You have a dark age. You have a collapse of civilization. And that's what has to be stopped. And the fact that Donald Trump is now taking on the cultural war is very important, because the LaRouche movement, of which I've been a part for 46 years, has been doing that been the only real force that's been doing that. That's been going after the counterculture. That's been going after the green genocide. That's been going after the destruction of classical music. That's been going after all of this and trying to keep alive the potential for sometime in the future to revive this tradition that goes back to the Renaissance. And that is where we are now. That's what's potentially possible as we go into this incredible, tumultuous period, which is not going to be an easy period for people. And so this is my update for this week, and tune in next week. Thank you.